So let's start over.
Yes, let's start over. Thank you. Hi,
Yes.
everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of the Flow Pro Show, where we're still figuring things out. I'm Sandy. You see us, Sandy U on Twitter, and I'm coming to you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania this month.
Yay. Well, I'm Daniel Laskowitz, and yeah, I'm coming from Utrecht in the Netherlands.
Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm Sunay Vaishnav. I am a senior program manager on the Microsoft Flow team, and I am coming in from Seattle, Washington, or well, Redmond right now.
All right. Thanks very much. We're so happy to have you on the show, Sunay. Looking forward to talking with you after we go through our news segments. So as people who have watched this show before know, we do a little bit of Microsoft news on Flow first, and then we go through and do some community news, and then we've been having a guest each time. Hopefully you watched our last episode where we had several guests who were the Flow MVPs that we recorded interviews with at Summit. So if you haven't seen that yet, I recommend you go back and check it out. So I'm gonna share our screen. We actually did some slides this time, which we did the first time too, but failed to do last time. Can one of you guys let people in from the lobby while I'm doing this, maybe? So first, Flow news. So here we're just going back through some of the Flow blog posts since our last episode, or actually, I think since April 1st is what we decided to do, is where we cut it off the last time. So first one is that Flow is now embedded in Azure IoT Central, which means, so sorry, Daniel, you were taking this one.
No problem. Well, yeah, we've seen Flow being embedded in different parts, right? We saw it already in Teams. We saw it embedded a little bit in SharePoint. Yeah, and now we also have it embedded in Azure IoT Central, which means you can actually create flows from Azure IoT Central. And you can, for instance, as you see in the example, you can use the trigger when a rule is fired from the Azure IoT Central connector. Then you can do whatever you want with it. So this example shows when the rule high temp is fired from an application, then it posts a message to team. So that's some of the scenarios you can do. And this makes it really cool to do stuff with IoT, of course. I can see lots of people going really crazy about this because I have a flick button, which I use in a demo every time I do a Flow presentation, and I think it's the most simple demo ever because it only has three different input types, and it just fires the action after that. And everybody loves it. And I do a lot of other demos that are way more advanced, but everybody is always with their mouths open like, oh, this is amazing. And I'm like, oh, it's so simple. So I can only imagine that all the IoT devices that people are going to use are going to blow everybody's mind. So I think this is going to be a great addition to the integrations that Flow already has.
Sunay, have you seen any sort of implementations of this that you're excited about, like that you've seen people do something with?
So yeah, I actually worked closely with the IoT Central team while they were building this, and some of the scenarios that they demoed to us were pretty cool. For example, like if you have a fleet of, let's say, 100 plus IoT devices, you can schedule like automatic updates to these devices, so they can go, you can kick them and they can go and download the newest latest firmwares at a scheduled time. And this is very important because, like, if your IoT device, say for example, is being used, let's say, in the 9 to 5 hour, mark, or if it's being used between the after hours, after work. So for example, I think some IoT devices are being used to control like lighting in apartment buildings and whatnot. So depending on the use cases of these IoT devices, you may want to update them at, specific time intervals. Sometimes you may want to update them at night. Sometimes you may want to update them, during working hours, because, people are actually turning lights on and off themselves. And you don't want the updates to happen. You may probably want updates to happen at that time. So I think that is a pretty interesting use case to me. And then you can also automatically, I think, execute commands using the connector on IoT devices. So for example, when a rule is fired and the rule is around, let's say, like if compute goes over X% value, reboot the device, right? So those kind of things can automatically be done using Flow. And I think those are really cool use cases, because you can not only now, trigger or perform actions based on certain like telemetry and events. You can also do them on a scheduled basis. So I think like the kind of use cases and automations that you can do with IoT plus Flow is just pretty neat, in my opinion.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for that additional insight. That's really helpful. Next, there was just a little tidbit about gateway cluster management being available within the Flow portal. So this isn't like a Flow action or trigger or anything, but just that you can access being able to manage gateway clusters right from within the Flow portal. I think it was like instead of going to Power Apps or something like that. So I don't use that myself, so don't know anything about it.
I think it also was about the gateway clusters where when some gateway is failing, then it could fall over to different gateways. And I think that was also the new part, or was that already there? I don't know.
I gathered it was just the ability to do that management here.
Oh,
but
okay.
maybe you could be right. Maybe that was a new thing too.
Yeah, I can maybe talk a little bit about this. So what this allows you to do now in the Flow portal as well as in the Power Apps portal, because the experiences I think are the same. So what this allows you to do is that you can basically have on-premises data gateway clusters instead of having one machine per gateway instance represented in the portal. So for example, like a gateway can comprise now of one or more machines. Traditionally, it was one gateway equals one machine. And for a point in time, like the configuration options were not available in the Flow or the Power Apps portal. You could, however, configure a highly available gateway cluster by using the configuration options in the installer itself on the gateway. So, you have to install the gateway code or software on your machine. And I think now what you can do is you can basically put this check mark and distribute the gateway across multiple machines that you have installed the gateway software on.
Okay. All right. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. And the use case for this is if you have any connectors that you connect to through a gateway and you want to distribute load of requests going through the gateway, you should probably use this feature.
Okay. All right. Thanks. This one's yours, Daniel.
Yeah, this is about the HTML code view for emails. When the V2 version of Send an Email came out, I was really happy because I can design my own email right now instead of doing all the HTML. But the first thing I was trying to do was insert a HTML table in the new action, and then I got an email with, this type of looking HTML. And I was like, how can I make this work? But luckily, the Flow team has released a new update for it, and now you're able to insert HTML in there. And that's actually a good thing because it makes it possible to do all the scenarios you can do in the V1 version, also in V2 now. and even more. So that's a really good thing. And there was also a flow checker improvement. And that gives you the ability to take you directly to errors where they are in your flow. So when you click something in the flow checker, then it goes to the action where the error actually is. So that's really interesting to immediately go there.
Yep. Yeah, and I think we are also planning on doing a little bit more. So, for example, what flow checker. So first off, let me talk a little bit and provide more color into HTML code view. So our plan is to allow the HTML editor with the code view as well, not only for emails, but for some other actions as well. So for example, I think adding text to a OneNote will probably also have this action. And then we will also start enabling the HTML editor for other actions that require, this kind of formatter or an editor, if you will. So send an email v2 is the first one. And obviously the reason why we enabled it only for the first one is because we wanted to collect feedback from our community. And the first time around when we released it, we heard the feedback loud and clear, which was like, without code view, this doesn't really work. So we went ahead and finished up code view, and now we are going to ship this thing across a variety of actions.
Cool.
With flow checker, what is ultimately the vision for flow checker is for it to be this widget or sort of a helper kind of experience that allows you to not create flows that fail a lot or error out a lot. So today it starts showing you where all the errors are, and then once you click on a specific type of error, it will go and put your cursor into the input field where that error is. But in the future, you can think of expressions being validated by the flow checker, and then if your expressions have errors in them, then we'll go suggest how to fix them or what changes you need to make in order to fix them. And then we will also start maybe checking one or two of your previous runs if they have failed, to see why they have failed and suggest edits in the designer view via the flow checker. So that's kind of the vision of flow checker, where it becomes this one utility for you that helps you analyze your flow, and then eventually helps fix these errors in your flow.
Cool. This is, I have to tell you, this is really great to get this inside view and context about these things, rather than just Daniel and I rambling on about them or speculating. Great, cool. Yeah. Okay, this one is improved visibility into trigger failures. So in the past, you could see if your flow failed, but if it failed to trigger for some reason, if there was some problem with the trigger, you couldn't really see that. And so now, I think that's now, it'll show you that message that you see on the screen there, that there's a problem with the trigger. I didn't happen to have any of my flows that had a problem with the trigger, so I couldn't see what the C details gives you exactly, but I guess this might be like if a trigger is sort of overloaded or something, that might happen.
Yeah, I can maybe take this.
Okay.
So there are two types of triggers, as you can see. One is called webhooks, and the other one's called polling.
Right.
So for audiences who don't know the difference between webhooks and polling,
that's great.
Webhooks are essentially the kind of triggers where when you create a flow goes and registers for event changes, right? So one of the most common examples is GitHub itself, the service supports webhook. So you could go and say, hey, whenever there is a new check-in on this GitHub repository, let me know about the change on this URL. And then when you do that, GitHub will basically track any changes on that repository and then notify you on a URL that you provide in order to let you know that something has changed.
Okay.
Polling triggers, on the other hand, are a little bit different in implementation. So the way that they work is, Flow will go and ask GitHub every 5, 10, or 15 minutes, has anything changed? Has anything changed? Has anything changed? And then when the change does happen, we fire or trigger, the trigger successfully triggers and then fires and runs your flow. So that's kind of the difference between polling triggers and, webhook triggers. Webhook triggers, the service itself tells us, something has changed, versus for polling triggers, we go and continuously ask if anything has changed.
Okay.
So now, if you think about like webhook triggers, your registration could have failed when you create the flow, right? So there are a variety of reasons. You could have, type the repository name, or the configuration on your trigger could be slightly off, which results in a bad request. And then your registration just does not complete. And if your registration does not complete, your trigger will never fire, and ergo your flow will never run. So what used to happen is that if you go under like see all, run history, and click failed checks, we would show this information to you, but it was like buried too deep within the product for you to even realize that something's not working. So with this new update, you will be able to see that there is an issue with your flow immediately when you go to the flow properties page, if there is an issue. And clicking on see details will help you figure out what that issue is, usually if it's a connection related issue. So for example, let's say that we can't register your trigger because your credentials have expired or something along those lines, then we'll ask you to go fix your connection. If it is something else, let's say there is an error because of some configuration changes or configuration that you've made in the trigger that is not working, then there'll be information there that'll help you to go make it right. So that's kind of the reason why this feature, even though it's like a status bar, it's quite important in terms of maintaining the health of your workflow.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Do we also get an email when this happens?
Yes, you will get an email when this.
Okay.
You can turn it off though. So there is this option that says repair tips on or off. If you turn off repair tips, you will not get emails on individual flow failures.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the next one, it's about the new connectors that are there. There's a variation of connectors already there, and I think one of the most important ones is the Microsoft Forms Pro. That kind of surprised me because I didn't know anything about it. And now when I look at it, and I saw some blogs from other people that are already experimenting with it, and it's really cool actually, because you can send out surveys, for instance, when something happens in your systems, for instance, in CDS or in Dynamics, or maybe in Salesforce, based on that info from that, for instance, an order, you can see that on the right side, send a survey when an order is fulfilled in Dynamics 365. So you can take information from that order and use it in your form. So you can also send the email with the name of the person that is receiving the email and stuff like that. So it's really customized to that person, and that's really cool. And there are some other connectors. There was a blockchain one. There's some other ones for. Sorry.
Yeah, right. I was just going to say yes.
Yeah.
All those other connectors. Yeah, I think they were mostly all third-party things, if I remember.
Yeah. Yeah. There's actually 2 blockchain ones, and there was also one for PDFs for converting them. And there was also actually some deprecations because there were some connectors like the Common Data Service that had multiple connectors. So they had the experimental one and the I think it was a legacy one. I don't know for sure, but I think it was that one. And they deprecate those in favor of the new one.
Oh, I didn't catch that. Okay.
Yeah. So that was, if you look at the blog post that is showed here, you can also see them at the bottom of the post. So that's interesting too.
Okay, cool. Now for a little bit of community news. So here we just take some things that we've found from around the community. But as always, if you guys, our audience, see something that you'd like us to highlight in the next show that came from community blog posts or videos, please let us know, and then we can do that. One was in the last episode, we talked a little bit about the being able to have the Flowbot post adaptive cards to teams, and neither of us had really had a chance to play around with it much, but just a few days after that aired, Laura Rogers put on her Power Hour a whole episode about doing the adaptive cards to teams, and so she did kind of a deep dive on that and showed exactly how to do that. So that's a great video to go back and watch if you're interested in that.
I think Brian is, because he's like, yes, adaptive cards in the chat.
Okay.
Brian does not like email. He likes Teams a lot.
That's awesome. Okay, the next one is actually from Peter Veenstra. And he wrote a two-part blog series about John Liu's Flow Studio. And Flow Studio is actually a product of John Liu, and you can buy that online. And it has some very interesting additions to what Flow offers already. So I think it's kind of like John thinks some things should be in Flow, and he built them for himself. And there's lots of other people who love to use these same features he already has. And well, Peter actually did a deep dive on the features in there, and that's really cool to read. But what I'm really interested in, Sunay, are you using Flow Studio, or did you take a look at it, because it actually can have some interesting stuff for you, right?
Yeah, no, I have actually taken a look at it. I mean, I'll cop that. I haven't taken a look at it recently, but okay. I did take a look at it in the past, and I would say like some of the things that that I see on the screenshot, and like in general, there's a lot of good stuff in there. There's a lot I think we as the Flow team can learn from this as well. But I don't know, because like at some level, Flow competes with Flow Studio. I don't know.
I don't think.
But yeah, no, it's like the Storage Explorer, right? Like if you have used Azure Storage, there's like tons of Azure Storage Explorers out there, and our product, like for example, like the Flow product itself is built for both, new users, novice users, and then like advanced users, like yourselves on this call. And I can think of like Flow Studio being like this product that is primarily driven for power users who cannot get the mileage out of the Flow product itself, right? Because Flow will always be catering to all audiences, versus I see Flow Studio as something that is catered to advanced users who already like use the Flow product, are deeply invested in it, and want to get more mileage and have like customizations on top of the UI that we offer. So I think, for example, I think one of the things that can be easily done in Flow Studio is like bulk approve or bulk reject, right? That is something that can probably be done in that UI. Similar to another thing you could maybe do is like you can have admin and like management experiences in the same UI, which probably is like unlikely to happen for the Flow product, because again, the audiences that the Flow product, again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but the audiences that we need to cater to is much wider than what I think Flow Studio caters to.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think I think I remember right, don't I, Daniel, that Peter put so there's a free version of Flow Studio and then the paid version, and so the first part is all about some of the features of the free version, and then the second part he runs through some of the features of the pro version.
Yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, take a look at it, guys, if you get a chance.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the third one we wanted to highlight was Melissa Hubbard just recently wrote a blog post about preventing infinite looping in a flow. So that is, for example, when you use the SharePoint, when an item is created or modified as your trigger, and then in your flow, you're modifying the item, and so therefore it triggers again, and then you modify it, and then it triggers again, and so on. So I think she ran into that recently, or someone she knows. And so she wrote a blog post about, in her scenario, she added a column that kind of gets written to, in this case, like that it has been reviewed, and then when the flow triggers again, it checks that condition to see, is that field, does it say that it was reviewed, and if so, then yeah, then go ahead and stop. I think it's, yeah, she's got, if that equals yes, then if it's ready for review, yeah, then go ahead and do the stuff, and otherwise just stop. So then it ends up going twice, I guess, the flow, but not, but it doesn't do anything the second time. It just goes ahead and stops.
Yep. Yeah, and I think one additional thing I would like to add is that for SharePoint specific triggers and actions, when you have something like this, Flow Checker actually catches an infinite loop and will warn you that there is there's a possible infinite loop in your flow.
Oh, I haven't noticed that, because I was just working on that recently with someone actually, and I don't remember it telling me that. Or is that something that's just rolling out?
I think it should have rolled out. I can maybe demo it for you at some point.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, actually, so now we have our guest segment. And so let me unshare my screen. So now you guys should see us. All right. And yeah, so now we have our special guest who has already been participating a lot anyway, and we're really happy to have you on the show. So thanks very much for coming on such short notice too. So do you want to maybe just tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your background and what you do on the Flow team?
Yeah, absolutely. So for folks who joined a little bit late, my name is Sunay Vaishnav. I'm a senior program manager on the Flow team. I've been with the Flow team since the very beginning. I work on a lot of things on the Flow product. I'm probably, some of you might know me if you've worked on custom connectors and have some echo.
Yeah, I think that might be coming from somebody who's not muted.
I'll mute.
Okay, there, got it.
Yep, there are.
So yeah, some of you might know me from having built custom connectors. I also worked on some of the features that you may know of, like test flows, the Word document connector, Flow Checker. I'm also continuously working on adding new features into the product. I also am in charge of the product satisfaction. So all those prompts that you see where it says, how likely are you to recommend this, flow to your friend or colleague? And whenever you write a comment in there, I actually go read each and every one of them. So that kind of pushes a lot into how we prioritize and look at our feature backlog. And there's a lot of analysis that goes behind that. Internally, we have this system called Net Promoter Score that is used to measure product health, and I can talk a little bit more about that. But all in all, I would say there are a lot of things that I've done while being on the Flow team. Vast range from starting from templates, portal, custom connectors, connections, etc. So in general, if you have any questions for me, feel free to reach out, over email or on the forums. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next half an hour and show you a couple of new things that we'll be releasing shortly.
Okay. All right,
Cool.
great.
Mm-hmm.
We had a couple initial questions that we wanted to ask you, and then I see we've got one or two questions in the chat, and then yeah, you offered kindly to demo some things that no one has seen yet, so we're excited about that. So we did want to talk about a little bit about April release notes, since that is out there. We're going to have a link to that at the in our notes on the on our YouTube channel. But I like the way it's written out, by the way, where you can see in different sections and then click on the links and go to read about that thing. But I was wondering, what are some of your favorite highlights that are coming out in this next semester, in this April semester release?
So for April, I think one of my favorite features that is in flight, I think, is the rename delete one that I think people have already started discovering. And I think with April and a little bit beyond April, so if you've read the October release notes as well, I think we will be focusing a lot on improving usability within the Flow Designer. So I'm really excited about all the improvements that we're going to make. And then I think copy paste is going to be my next favorite feature that comes out. In terms of like overall philosophy and kind of the direction that we as a team are marching towards, you will see more and more investments in the DevOps space, rather, because what we want to do is we want users to be able to create flows with minimum friction, but we also want users to be able to create flows in a more reliable way where they can manage the application lifecycle of their flows along with the things that these flows are dependent on. So if you say, for example, have a Power Apps and a flow, you don't want to be updating each component at a time. So you will see a lot of investments in these spaces, solutioning, and amongst other things like CDS, transport via solutions. So I think that is very interesting to me as well, and that is something to keep an eye out for.
Okay, cool, thanks. Did you have some things that you wanted to ask, Daniel?
Yeah.
You want to talk about? Yeah.
Well, you already told something about the copy and paste flow actions. That's kind of my favorite one.
Yep.
And I also love the deactivate actions. And that's also a really highly requested one, I think, from the IDs forum. Yeah, and talking about the IDs forum, how do you actually prioritize those features, apart from, of course, the votes, because the votes probably do a lot. But then you also have to kind of prioritize those potentially new features with the Flow team. And how do you do that?
So yeah, so the Flow team, I'll have a multi-step answer to this. At a high level, so the way the Flow team operates is that we look for high return on investment, right? And the metrics that we track for ourselves, again, are our product health and customer satisfaction. And then, like every other product out there in the world, we try to track like the amount of users, like active users on our product. So whenever we are looking at features or forum requests, or even feature requests that come through a variety of different sources, we ask ourselves this question, right? Where how much investment do we need to make in order to make this customer request happen? Is it the right thing and the best thing for our customers? And will it result in higher customer satisfaction and user growth? And then that's how we balance things out. So if the investment costs are really, really high, and let me give you a more concrete example. Let's say there's a feature that has 1,000 votes, and there's another feature that has 500 votes. And if the feature with 1,000 votes requires us a year to go make happen, versus the one with 500 votes requires us a month to go make happen, then we'll go choose the one with a higher return on investment, which is the month-long feature. So that's kind of the rudimentary logic around it. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes behind it. There's product strategy, there's like market vision, product fit, and then we also look at our competitors and how they, try to compete with things in the space. And ultimately, I think it also comes down to like what is functionally possible versus what is functionally nice to have. So there are certain things that will not block you from getting to your use case and scenario, versus there'll be some things, features that is just, if we don't do them, you won't be able to get through to automate the scenarios that you want. So that is another pivot that we look at. If something is already possible in the product, but it's, let's say, somewhat hard to do, versus something that is like impossible to do in the product, then we'll go solve the impossible thing first. And then we will get to improving the other cases. So that's the general logic behind how we prioritize things. And the deactivating an action is a great example of this. So as you might know, the Logic Apps team has built and shipped this feature, but on the flow side, we want to do a little bit more. So we want to try and tie it in with the test flows concept. Obviously, all of this is subject to change. We are still working through the process of it. But I think the important question for us to ask, and really this is something that me and Steven work on a lot, is when would you as a user like to deactivate the action, right? If you deactivate an action and let's say an actual run gets caught or an actual event triggers, should that action be deactivated, or do you only want to deactivate the action when you're testing your flow? So these are the kind of.
Can I just interrupt one second? So deactivating, that has to do with the static values, right?
Right.
Where you want to say you just want to, for testing and so on, you just want to use some static values.
Right, but it's. I mean, one scenario is that I want to use static values when I'm testing. The other scenario is I want to use static values for, like, day 0, I create my flow. Day 10, something happens. Now I want to use static values from day 10 to day 20. On day 20, I want to remove static values. Okay. So that is also a scenario.
I see.
How do we support that? How do we make it extremely clear to our users that performing certain gestures in the UI may result in varying different behaviors when your flow executes? So that is the challenge. It's not, sometimes the challenge is to figure out what really we should do for our customers if the technical implementations are straightforward. Sometimes we know what we want to do for our customers, but the technical implementations are a lot harder to go achieve. So there is a balance of all things, and all of these things get considered when we prioritize features, to long story short.
Or short story long. No, that's really good to understand that sort of thing, I think.
Yep. Okay. So I hope that answers your question, Daniel.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
We had a question in the chat. Martin was asking, he mentions that Flow Studio can make a backup of a flow. And is this something that might come into flow management actions?
You can kind of already take a backup of your flow if you export it into a package.
I'm guessing he might mean sort of in an automated way.
Yeah. So
because he says about flow management actions, or that
so in the flow management connector, I think this is something that is on their backlog. I would highly recommend, again, using your user votes to bubble it up. But yeah, this is something, again, like we want to like really iron out our application lifecycle management story. And you will see a lot of investment in this space in the next few months. So please keep an eye out and continue to give feedback on these kind of things so that they get prioritized correctly by the product team.
And feedback that includes the little pop-ups that asks for your comments, right? Okay.
Yes. Those comments do get read by real people. I read all of them for Flow. There is a person on the Power Apps team that does the same for the Power Apps side of the world, and similarly for the admin world. So when you leave those comments, please be as descriptive as possible to tell us what your problems are, and then we use those, like product PMs use those to get resourcing and funding to go solve these problems. Because again, our team and our organization in general is extremely data driven. So I would say that data driven culture requires us to collect these data points, and the more data points you as our customers give us, the better it helps us to build these features for you.
Great, that's really good to know.
Yeah, and start every feedback on Flow with "Dear Sunay."
Yeah, if you do that, then I will definitely look at it and be like, yeah, you've heard what I've said, so I'm gonna hear what you have to say as well.
I like the part where you said that you do the impossible things.
Yeah. Yeah, because in software, nothing is really impossible.
Okay, all right. You heard it here first.
Challenge
first,
accepted. There's Sunay.
Did we have any more other specific questions, Daniel, or are we ready to go to demos?
I think I'm ready for demos.
Okay.
All right.
Really looking forward to it.
Yeah. Now here's the part where I don't remember what I need to do to let you show your screen, Sunay, or are you just able to do that? Are you able to? You should be just able to share your screen.
I should just be able to do it.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let me know when you can see it.
Yep.
All right. What would you guys like to see first? So I have a couple of demos, and if we have time, I can even do a little bit more on some very, very new features that are being built. So
I have all the time in the world, so just people can drop off if they need to, but there'll be the recording. So
right.
Okay.
So let me first.
People in the chat. Copy paste.
Yeah.
Copy paste.
Yes. That's my.
Everyone wants copy paste. So I'll go ahead and do copy paste first. Then I'll show you the infinite loop detection with SharePoint. And then finally, I'll show you some new create experiences that we are starting to roll out soon as well.
Okay.
So let's see. I'll create an existing flow. Oh, by the way, this is the new properties page that is being built. It's a lot cleaner. It'll have a lot more information on it once it gets finished. So copy paste, right? So it's pretty simple. Let's imagine that you have two actions. I have the send an email action. It has my email address in it, a string function in it, and then some text in it, right? And I want to copy this action. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename it. Send an email for demo, so that you know how we do it. And then if you click ... there is this new command called copy to my clipboard. Once you hit that, it gets copied to your clipboard, and there'll be a UX gesture that tells you that it's copied to your clipboard. And then after you click on add new step, you have this new command or new section called my clipboard. And then you can drop the card here, and it replicates everything that was in there. Yay. Along with the connection references. And over time, when you do conditions and conditional branches, we will be able to pick all those things in the branches as well and put it into the clipboard. And then if you know how to use scopes, so I don't know if this is going to work because this is the build, but let's try it anyway, because I want to show you how it will work. So I could take multiple actions and put in a scope, and then I can copy that.
Oh, sweet.
And can drop another scope. And it gives you, so you can now do copy multiple actions at the same time.
Cool. We're getting really nice comments in the chat about this.
Half of your pain is gone now.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you.
So so this is what is being what is being built in over the last month or so.
And now,
Mhm.
did you say something about this? You'll be able to copy actions between flows, though, too. So
yes. So let's see if I can show you that. So we are in the flow that says button send an email. And once this loads, I'm going to go to a different flow, which is this one, right? This is disabled right now. Dismiss. I have a lot of broken connections in my demo environment. So new step, clipboard. And today it doesn't show, but if you actually, the reason why it doesn't show up is because I have an incognito browser. But if you had a regular, browser tabs that can share the cache, then it would show up here as well. So you should be able to copy actions across multiple flows too.
Cool.
But it wouldn't work if you were across multiple browsers for the first click stop. Over time, ultimately what we want to do is we want to be able to give you a cloud clipboard kind of capability so that you can add things to your clipboard and it kind of works within the scope of the account that you're in. Nice. So if you go away from your desktop, it won't clear out every time you log out of Flow.
Yeah, so actually when I saw the part about that it goes into a clipboard, there would be a clipboard tab. I wasn't picturing the tab there under choose an action. I was picturing it under my flows, like you've got my flows, team flows, business process flows. I thought maybe there was a clipboard there. Is that maybe how you could make that sticky, sort of? I don't know.
So it would, your clipboard would become sticky over time. But ultimately, the way you add things from your clipboard will still be through this experience, which is why we decided to put it here. Like imagine if you had a clipboard here, right? Like dragging those actions or those things from your clipboard onto your Flow canvas is still a little bit harder for you to do because that's a new interaction pattern that you would have to learn. This way, you don't have to learn a new interaction pattern. You still are adding actions same way you're adding any other action onto the canvas.
Okay.
And that is kind of what we wanted to do.
That's fair.
And which is why it also reduces development time for us because it uses the same interaction patterns as any other action that is given by a connector. So we can, underneath the covers, model this really well in terms of how we look at how the UI piece looks at things underneath the covers. An action coming from a connector is no different from an action that you have added to a clipboard.
Cool. Very cool.
Yep.
Thank
you.
So
there was a question on the chat. Why are question marks not allowed in action names?
In action names? Oh, I did not know that.
Me neither. I'm like,
they are allowed.
They are allowed. What?
Yeah,
interesting.
That's new to me. Is that in the production environment as well?
Let's try it. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, let me check it in mine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think this is maybe a good segue to show you the thing about infinite loop. So as you can see here, I have when an item is created in this site and in this list, there's a create item in the same site and same list. Right. And you can see there's like this grayish area. We don't know if it's definitely an error or not. We can only tell you. And then it says actions may result in an infinite trigger loop. Please, and you add appropriate conditional checks to prevent this Flow from triggering itself.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So that kind of does exist. So for folks who work on a lot of SharePoint related things, keep an eye out for this gray bubble, because whenever it shows up, it kind of means that you might have an infinite loop.
Okay.
It does go away if you add a condition. So if I go here and add a condition, I can't spell. And then if I actually work with, let's say, approved, I need to add one token in there. Then I think it goes away. Or does it not? There you go. It goes away.
Oh, nice. Okay.
That's cool.
The people who were asking about the question mark thing, they said that error will come up when you go to try to save that flow.
Oh, interesting. Okay, let's do it. Save.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Ah.
I'm not sure why, but if I can try to think of it, it probably is because these are Unicode characters that are reserved for URL management. So for example, you can do question mark query parameter in URL.
Right.
Since the flow definition is JSON, we might be dereferencing certain things, but I'm not 100% sure why this is. I can try to work with the Logic Apps team and give you a better answer.
I would also wonder if it might have to do with, like, if you want to use that in an expression later, I think that it might throw things off.
That could be the case, but expressions, like, you would still wrap the thing in quotes. So the action name would be wrapped in quotes. So that would allow us to dereference it. This is more to protect against, like, injection attacks. Because ultimately what happens is when you create a flow and when it runs underneath the covers, everything is an API request over REST semantics. So in REST semantics, question mark, forward slashes, etc., are reserved characters that need to be encoded differently. So now we wouldn't know if it's part of your action name or if the thing is part of your URL, like API request that is being made, right? So let's see if I can do Clipboard and show you what I mean. Okay. There it is. So if you see here, this path / dataset / whatever encode URI component / that is like a URI, right? Now imagine if there's a question mark in here, we know how to encode that. But if your action name has a question mark in it and somehow gets referenced around in the definition, we wouldn't know really how to encode it. Because it's very difficult to identify whether it's part of a display name or it's part of the actual URI that we want to execute.
Gotcha. Okay.
That could be the case. I'm speculating, but
that sounds very reasonable to me.
Yeah.
I saw also another comment in the chat about versioning and history. Is there anything coming on that side? So when you go look at versioning of flows, and I think Dennis was also talking about the history of a flow.
So yes, this is something we are looking at. We want to build this into the flow product, but what we also want to ensure is that we are consistent across the board in terms of how we tell our application lifecycle management story. So if you are aware of not just flow but Power Apps and CDS and all these other things, versioning has to work with different components as well. So let me give you, if it's flow agnostic or if it's flow only, right? Like if you're working on standalone flow, then it's much easier to build versioning, because what we can very easily do is we can store like last 10 versions of your flow, allow you to roll back, etc. But now if you have a Power App that depends on a flow, and then if you roll back the Power App, should you roll back the flow with it as well, right? If the versions have changed. If you don't roll back the flow, then the Power App can break. So what we want to do is when we think of versioning, we want to think about it from a business application platform perspective, not just from the perspective of flow. So my answer is it is coming soon, but it'll be a holistic story that works across business application platform, not just from the perspective of a siloed flow product.
Okay. That seems fair.
Okay.
Yeah, so did you have some other things you wanted to demo for us too? We've got some little bit of time left.
Yeah, so the other thing I wanted to show was the new create experiences, and I'd love to see what the reactions are on this one. So today, if I go to production and click new, a lot of flows. So we have this experience, which is okay, it's not the best. So what we have been working on is creating a lot better experience for automated, instant, and scheduled flows. So now you will be able to decide upfront what kind of flow you want to create. And you can skip through this process if you think this is like not something that you would like to use either. But let me show you an example of like a scheduled flow, right? So you will first.
So sort of like an easy configuration. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. So you will be able to like, put a name for your flow up front. If you don't add a name, that's fine. We will generate one for you. You can decide when the flow starts. So there's a nice calendar picker and, time control. And then if you say, hey, I wanted to repeat every day, you can do that every week. And we'll pop in a nice control for you where you can select, I want my flow to run on these days, and so on and so forth. So it's a much simpler experience for you to go create like a scheduled flow, right? The same thing will apply to, let's say, automated flows. So if I go and say I want to create an automated flow, then there's this nice experience where you can search which trigger you want. So I can say when a new item is added.
Could I also search for a connector in that same box, or do I have to search for the name of the trigger?
No, it starts with trigger. So this is like a trigger first experience.
Right, I know, but like in the current one, when you're going to search for your trigger, you can search for the connector name, and then it'll show you what triggers are available.
So that works here.
All right.
If you click Dropbox, then it'll show you all the Dropbox connectors. Perfect. You can also skip through this experience if you want. That's fine too. If you hit skip, it'll land you in the designer experience. But what our goal with this kind of experience is that we want to streamline your trigger selection experience significantly, and we not only want to allow you to search through this, but at some point we will also start remembering what you've used and like sort of push that up in the recents bucket, so that now you will not have to like go through the process of, if you use one particular trigger a lot more often than others, right, then it'll just show up under recent, and then you'll be able to select it and go forward from it without having to go through the process of connector, trigger, and then select.
Yeah, I've heard that request a lot in the past.
Yeah. So that's kind of where this takes us. And it simplifies the experience for first-time creators as well, without overwhelming them with the whole designer experience where you're like, oh, search a connector, put a trigger down, etc. Especially for like scheduled flows, right? Because if you look at the scheduled flow experience, it's a lot like scheduling a calendar invite or a recurring meeting, which a lot of people are used to, versus the recurrence trigger, asks you sometimes to provide like the starting time zone. This wizard will basically pick your current time zone and match things with it, so that you don't have to give it what time zone you're in, which kind of is an advanced thing anyway. And if you do want to change the time zone where the flow should start, then you can do that with the advanced settings.
Okay. I want to say too, I like the part about asking for a name up front, because when that changed to where it didn't, like it used to, I think, but then it changed to where you had to remember to go up to that little part on the upper left and write it. That's easy to forget.
Yeah, and what will happen is that when this new experience gets finalized, you will also be able to edit, and there'll be a text box here that'll allow you to rename your flow, along with a command up here that says ... or there'll be a rename command. So you won't have to go into the flow designer or the studio experience to rename your flow. It'll just be a very simple commanding gesture to go rename your flow.
Okay. Putting you on the spot a little bit. Estimated time frame?
I would say anywhere between a month from now.
Oh, okay.
Month and a half.
Okay.
This is this is close to being done, as you can see. It's just we need to do some sort of testing on our end, ensure that things don't break anything, and all the new code looks nice and dandy, and then we'll go ship it.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. How many of you have noticed the changes to the dynamic content picker?
Not sure. How do you mean?
Right. So we've also changed the algorithm that kind of recommends dynamic content recently. So this is being flighted out right now, and we haven't talked about it a lot. But what you will see happening is that a lot more dynamic content tokens will be suggested in the right context, instead of users having to click see more to see tokens that are not being suggested. So we have, I think, in one way, relaxed our rules for recommending dynamic content. And at the same time, we have improved the logic behind what may work and what may not work in a specific field. So let me give you maybe a real world example. What can I take? All right, let's take a very simple flow where I have three different types of button trigger inputs, right? So I can define an email field, right? Which is, let's say, email. Then I can define a text field that is also contains the word email. And then as some of you may know, we also have an output that is the manually trigger or invoker's email address, right? That gets picked up. So now, as you can see, in the right-hand side, I have email field, and user email, all three popping up. Traditionally, what would happen is only the one that says email field would pop up, because that's explicitly off-type email.
I see.
But now what we do is we also check the string that defines the token and see if it has the word, there is some affinity to email in here. So we will show this field when you put your cursor in a input field that requires you to provide email. And this thing applies to a lot of other types of formats as well.
Oh, that's good.
What will end up happening is that we will get really good over time with ML and those kind of things at recommending output tokens, so that you don't have to go hunt and dig for these things.
Okay, great.
So we need to name our inputs really good.
Well, that's true too.
Yeah, especially if you say, for example, are collecting data from Excel, right? And if you name your column email, there's no way Flow knows that the format of data in that column is going to be of type, XYZ at whatever.com. But now what we can at least try to do is, based on your column titles, we can try to figure out whether it's email or date time or a specific format, so that those kind of fields get bubbled up in the respective places where they need to go, right? Cool. So imagine that this is not date time, but if I go and maybe look at a date time column, No, wrong.
The only one you just didn't want to pick, right?
Sorry, I need data. Take time.
That's fine. Yeah.
But like if I do this, then you can now see a lot of these things, including date. And then we also show you send an email body, because we don't know what it might be. Like it may work in Basetime or it may not. Traditionally, you would just see, see more here without any tokens in the send an email option. So we try to expose as much as possible. And, depending on the type of the input, depending on the input type, all of these things will be ordered by probability of working.
And this is only working for Flow or also for Logic Apps?
This is currently for Flow only, but we are working with the Logic Apps team to make sure that they also take that code change up.
Can you also bring the dynamic content field back on? I'm asking for a friend, but the expression panel.
Yes.
Are there also any things on the roadmap to make the input field a little bit bigger?
Yeah.
So there is a whole effort to go redesign how dynamic content and expressions are added. I think there are two things that we are focusing on mainly. One is to give you a mouse-less experience to add dynamic content and expressions. So today, I think one of the biggest pain point is I type, right? And then I have to move my mouse. It wouldn't be cool if I could just hit something like control space and then invoke dynamic content and then arrow up and down and hit enter and select the token. So that is it is a bigger, larger effort to fix these kind of things and improve usability. And as part of that, expression editing will also get much seamless, I would say. So that's kind of where we want to take this, and it is being worked on right now. I would expect something to deliver in the October timeframe.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Is there anything else in particular that you wanted to show us, or should we wrap it up?
I think this is all I had for today.
Okay. All right. Well, that's great.
But if there are any other things that you would like to see, I can probably demo them.
Well, I think this is great, though. Yeah, we really appreciate your time coming on here with us, and all of your great comments and everything. I think everybody in the chat did as well. Appreciate that. So I think we'll close.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen then.
Okay.
Sure.
Teams.
All right. Great. All right. Well, yeah. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining. And make sure to tell your friends to subscribe to our YouTube channel for future updates. We don't have a specific schedule yet for the next one, but it'll be sometime in May.
Yeah.
We'll let
Looking
Twitter
forward
know.
to it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thanks, Sunay, so much.
Yep.
All
No
right.
worries. I'm more than happy to be here, and looking forward to the next one.
Great.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Hey, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.